Hello, and welcome back to another episode of General Conference Conversations, the podcast where we have conversations about General Conference. I'm your host, Kaylin, and I'm super excited to be here with you today discussing the words of Christ's chosen leaders. So let's get right into it. So I'm a little bit late with this episode, just by a day, I guess. My husband and I were out of town for a couple of weeks, and so I had those episodes taken care of. They were all, scheduled and recorded ahead of time. But of course, coming home from a trip, you have a lot of stuff that hasn't gotten done for 2 weeks, and recovery, and even vacation for vacation. So it's taken me a little bit longer than I would have liked to get this episode together, but I am on track. And we are at the very end of the Saturday afternoon session. This is the second to last talk, so next episode will be the last talk in this session, and then Saturday evening session is just 4 talks, which was a really short Saturday evening session this time around. So that'll be a couple of weeks, and then I'll take a break for a couple of weeks, and then we'll finish up the conference. Can you believe it's already June? Actually, it's halfway through June. It's not even just June anymore. It's halfway through June, which is crazy. It's crazy. Anyway, as I was saying, we are talking about Elder de Hoyos' talk, The Work of the Temple and Family History, One and the Same Work. And as always, I encourage you to go and listen to and or read this talk before you come listen to me talk about it, so you can get your own inspirations and promptings, and pay attention to things that stick out to you as you read through it, and then hopefully I can add something, ask a question, tell a story that you might not have thought of that might help in your study, in your application of these principles into your life. So honestly, and I know I say this all the time, and so it's probably not going to be true, I don't know how long this episode is going to be. This is a very straightforward episode, talk. It's a very beautiful talk, and I will probably have more to talk about with family history than I think I will. So we'll see how much I have kind of to talk about. Like I said, it's very straightforward, and it's a lot of kind of history. He details a lot of the history of temples and family history work in the church and in our history. So he starts out by talking about how grateful he is for the ongoing building of temples. That since the very beginning, temples were important, have been important. Obviously, right? As we know, the Kirtland Temple was the first temple to be built in this dispensation, and he has the date. They finished the Kirtland Temple in the spring of 1836. So that was only, that was 16 years after the first vision, but only 6 years after the church was officially organized in 1830. So that's pretty quick, especially, taking into account how long it would have taken them to actually build that temple. I don't know off the top of my head how long it took them to build that. I should have looked that up. But I know it was a slog. They had to, get the money and the workers and everything, right? It's not like not like today where you just truck everything in and then, you have cranes and stuff. Like, it's a lot of work. So, very obvious, big deal, very important, and it makes sense, right? It goes right along with what President Nelson has been talking about for the last few years, the gathering of Israel. Temple work, family history work is part of the gathering of Israel. It's gathering Israel on the other side of the veil. And so they continue to be super, super important, and not just for the the gathering of Israel, not just for family work, like ordinances for the dead, which are also very important, but also for us as we make covenants in the temple and can come closer to Christ and our heavenly parents through those covenants. So he talks about all the sacrifices that people have made since the beginning of the church to make covenants in temples, whether that was building the temples, donating their time and their effort to actually build a temple, waiting years and years and years and years to finally receive their endowments, receive ordinances, crossing the plains, donating money, whatever. And he talks about how in 1975 he and his wife were living in Mexico City, and the closest temple to them was Mesa, Arizona. And so they had to make, he says, many economic sacrifices to travel from Mexico City to Mesa to be sealed. And so the Mesa Temple has a very sentimental value for me. Arizona, just in general, I served my mission in Mesa, and during the 18 months that I served there and the 9 months that I lived there after I got back from my mission, the Mesa Temple was closed. So we were able to kind of watch it, like when I first got into the mission. It was tradition that when you first got into the mission, they would take you to the Mesa Temple and you would line up on the steps in front of the front doors and take a picture with the transfer that you came in with, all the new missionaries that come in with you, and your mission president and his wife and the APs. Well, the Mesa Temple was closed, and so they just drove us past it, and then we went and took pictures somewhere else. But I remember, one, I was super excited that I was going to have a temple in my mission, and then I was really disappointed when I found out that it was going to be closed for probably the whole time I was going to be there. And they didn't really have an end date. They had originally said 2 years, and it ended up being more like 3.5. Part of that was COVID. They weren't going to do an open house in the middle of COVID because nobody would be able to go. But nobody could really tell me when it was going to open. And I remember driving past it the first time, and it looked really strange to me. It's different. It doesn't have a spire. It's not square, but it's made to look like an altar. So it doesn't have a spire. It doesn't have an angel Moroni. It has beautiful carvings on the top of pioneers with like hand carts and oxen. And when we drove by, they'd torn out all the landscaping. They did like a complete overhaul of the temple. They had torn out all the landscaping. They had torn down the visitor center. They built a brand new visitor center. They did a bunch of work on the inside. I don't even know all they changed because I didn't ever go into how it used to be. But like I said, it took 3 years. They did like their rededication and everything. And so when we drove past it, it looked like ruins, like Roman ruins. Some of the windows were like plyboarded on the inside. There was scaffolding everywhere, and it was just desert all around. It was a big dirt lot around this building. And then of course they had fences, big chain link fences, so we couldn't really even see. They were like covered, so we couldn't really even see like the lot at all. And so anyway, over the next 18 months, I heard a lot about the temple, and even people who didn't really know much about the church at least knew that the temple existed because it was a big part of Mesa. It's a very recognizable building right in the heart of downtown Mesa. And so many people were they'd find out that we'd never been in the temple, or we found out that we probably wouldn't be going to the temple while we were on our mission, and they were always like so sad. They're like, you're not gonna be able to go in. There's no, they do temple lights every year. They didn't do temple lights while it was, going. They do an Easter pageant every spring. They weren't doing the Easter pageant, so like it was kind of sad, but we were able to kind of watch as the progression kept going. We didn't obviously know what was going on inside, but we started to see the landscaping. They put in the palm trees and they started putting in sod and all of that, and it slowly they took down the outer fences so you could walk through some of the grounds that were finished. And then I moved up here to Canada to marry my husband, and I missed the open house by like 3 weeks. I was really disappointed that I wasn't able to go to the open house. But this last week while we were on our vacation, part of our vacation was road trip down to Mesa. It was the first time my husband and I met on our missions in Mesa. And so it was the first time we had been back together to the mission, and we were able to go to the Mesa temple, go inside and do a session. And it was really, really special to do that. We were still very lucky. We had the Gilbert Temple was about 20 minutes away, and so we still were able to go to the temple as missionaries. We just didn't go to the Mesa Temple. So I also have a very close connection with the Gilbert Temple, but the Mesa Temple will just always hold up like a special place in my heart because it's my missions temple, even though it wasn't open while I was on my mission. But I forget, Mesa Temple was built in like 1927, or dedicated in like 1927. So it's been around for almost 100 years. And for a long, long time, it was the only temple in like the southwest specifically area. And so all of the countries in like Central America and South America, before they had temples down there, they would travel all the way to Arizona. That was their temple. That was the closest temple to them. And I met so many people who had a connection to the temple like that, or knew somebody, or had ancestors or whatever who, oh yeah, they got married in the Mesa Temple, but they were from Brazil or Chile or Argentina. But that was their temple, and so they saved up the money to take a bus or a train or whatever, or to drive all the way from South America to Mesa, Arizona to get their ordinances done in the Mesa Temple. And so it was cool to hear that in conference and to be reminded of that, and to be reminded of how many temples we have now. It was 1975, and we talk about this, right? Especially President Nelson has, and especially since President Nelson has was called as an apostle, temples have exploded. And just during his prophetship, in the last, what has it been now, 5 years that he's been a prophet, he's announced like at least 10 temples every conference, at least. This last one was 18, 20? Now I have to check because I'm curious. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 temples this last conference, the one that we're talking about. Last October, I think, was 17. Like, it's a lot of temples, right? A lot of temples. Mexico City, just where Elder de Hoyos is talking about, where they were from, has one now, so they would have been able to go just in the city they lived in. And was it either April or October of last year, President Nelson announced that they were going to be putting smaller temples around big metropolitan areas like Mexico City. So they have one in Mexico City, and there's 4 or 5 that are announced, smaller temples, so that even people who live like on the very outskirts of the city and would take hours to get into the temple will be even closer to the temple. And I mean, I think about all the people that I know that are not, are my parents' age or just a little bit older, who, they went to the temple when they got to the MTC. They didn't have a temple close enough. They got their endowments in the MTC. Or, the DC temple was the closest and they lived in, I don't know, Maine or whatever, right? You think of those crazy, crazy stories. And how different that is now, at least in the States and in Canada, right? And in South America, they're pretty, like, there's quite a few temples down there. But then you think of other places in the world who still have to drive 10 hours to get to a temple, or it's a whole couple of days journey. I studied abroad in England, and I visited Dublin while I was over there, and I went to church on Sunday at a sacrament meeting. And they don't have a temple in Dublin or in Ireland at all. The closest temple is the I'm totally blanking. It's not the London temple. It is the other one. I'll get it in a second. Hold on. But they, for their temple trips, they took a plane. They would fly to they'd fly. It was like so strange to me. I mean, they could take the ferry, but nobody likes taking the ferry across the channel apparently. So for their temple trips, they would book planes and they would fly across the channel and they would come back. And that just blew my mind. I mean, part of that is also like living in Europe, public transportation, trains, planes, whatever, are very different than living in the States. And so, that's different as well. But, wow, this is really gonna bug me that I can't find the name of this temple. Oh boy. England. Preston. Oh my goodness, this is gonna really bug me that I did know that. Preston, England temple. That was the closest. Anyway, and it got me thinking as I was reading through this, and I was thinking about like the promises that have been made that in the latter days and during the millennium, so many temples will be built that everybody will be a reasonable distance from the temple. I don't know what reasonable distance means, right? Is that an hour? Is that 2 hours? Is that 10 minutes? I don't know necessarily what that means, but we're seeing that in our lifetimes coming true of all the temples that are being built right now. And a few years ago, was it 4 years ago? It was actually, it was when I was in the MTC, April 2019 General Conference. President Nelson announced a temple in Hungary. And I had a friend who had served her mission in Hungary, and so I thought of her when they announced it. And then a few months later, I was reading, they have this thing on the LDS library called Young Adult Weekly, and they're articles written by and for young adults. And there was one that was talking all about having this temple, this new temple in Hungary. And it took my breath away, like thinking about this. And she was helping to translate General Conference live as it was happening. And it's like midnight there, you know, the time difference is, you know, hours and hours. But then he announced it, and the way that I'll link this article, I'll put it in the show notes and in my further study, because you should definitely read it, because it is absolutely amazing. The way that she talks about how excited they are to have a temple in Hungary, and she talked about before it was at 10 hours to get to the nearest temple, and now it would only be 2. And I think about, like, I mean, how hard it was for my family growing up to get to temple that was 2 hours away. How hard it is for me now to get to the temple. I live a 2-minute walk away. And I think just how much we take temples for granted, because they're everywhere now. And Elder de Hoyos talks about that. He says, you know, that experience, having to travel from Mexico City to Arizona to get sealed, made me appreciate the effort and the sacrifice and the joy that the early saints had when they finally finished the Kirtland Temple, and how excited they were that they were finally able to have that gathering place and to start having ordinances. And then obviously the Nauvoo Temple and all the temples that came after it. So he then, as I said, he kind of gives a timeline of temples and family history work. The temple in Kirtland being dedicated, and then all the visions and like angelic appearances that happened in that temple, with the Elijah coming and talking about family history work and the keys and all of that stuff. And then in talking about, he then talks about after the Kirtland Temple was dedicated, the kind of random, spontaneous eruption of interest in genealogy. And I mean, we're not the only people in the world who, oh, sorry, birds cawing in the background. We're not the only people, the only church who is interested in genealogy. There are so many websites and groups and whatever, right? A lot of people are interested in learning where they come from, their DNA, their family's stories, and their ancestors' stories. And he has a couple of quotes from President Boyd K. Packer about how that all kind of started right after Kirtland Temple was dedicated. And then he talks about the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple, and how when that was dedicated 1893, President Wilford Woodruff encouraged all of the members of the church to keep and to find the records for ancestors and to start recording their genealogy as far back as they could, and then to take them to the temple and get all of their ordinances done. And then 1 year later, President Woodruff oversaw the creation of the Genealogical Society of Utah. And how far that's come, right? We think of Family Search and the amazing things that you can do with Family Search, and the the amazing things, all of the work that we have been able to do in the last 100 to 100 years, right? Well, yeah, 100, almost 200 years. So President de Hoyos, sorry, nope, Elder de Hoyos says, "Dear brothers and sisters, the Lord encourages us as members of His church to preserve our own family history, to learn from our ancestors, and to make the necessary arrangements for them to receive the ordinances of the gospel in the temples to help them progress along the covenant path, which will bless them with an eternal family. This is a central focus of the plan of our Heavenly Father, uniting family for this life and for eternity." And then he goes on, he's like, to those of you who don't feel like you're capable of doing this work, you're not alone. Sometimes genealogy can be really overwhelming, and we have a very specific way of thinking about what genealogy is. And, when I think of family history, when I think of genealogy work, I think of finding names and putting them in my family tree, right? It's all of the research and coming through records and indexing and all of this stuff. But there's so much more that you can do that is family history work. And so I want you to think about two questions as I kind of talk about my own history with family history. What family history work have you done in the past? Did you like it? Did you hate it? And what ways can you perform family history work? Oh my goodness, sorry. What can you do to perform family history work in ways that work for you? I'm going to talk about a few different ways that you can do family history work that you might not have thought of before. He also encourages you to get a hold of the family history consultants in your ward, and they will have even more suggestions and help. And if you really do want to get really into it and do your family tree and add people and do research and do indexing, they will be more than happy. Everywhere that I've been in, you go to the family history consultants, and they love when they have questions, when people ask them questions. Even just getting into your family search account and learning how to take names, your own names, the temple, if you don't know how to do that, they're more than happy to help you with all of that. But so I love indexing. When I was a youth, they did I don't remember how many names, I think it was 10 million names. They were trying to have 10 million names indexed in, it was a week or a day or something like that. And I remember doing that, and I loved it. I really love indexing. I know not everybody loves indexing. It can be really hard depending on the kinds of batches that you get and the handwriting and if there's anything that you can actually index. So you can still index online. You can index through Family Search. But they also, last year when can't remember what year it was, but one of the censuses was released, because they're released 75 years later or something like that. And instead of having everybody do that by hand, they had computers read all of the census, and then they had an app that all you had to do was go through and make sure everything that the computer read was correct, or at least correct enough. And if you didn't know, there was an I don't know button, and it was reviewed by several different people, so they could, if they could read cursive better than you could, or they saw something different. And they put it on an app you can do on your phone. I think you can also do it online, on a desktop as well. But you would just click through, enter yes, 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 whatever. And it made it really easy for youth to be involved. It made it really easy for anybody to be involved. You could do it on your phone, sitting, in line at the grocery store, or waiting to get gas, or, whatever. You had 5 minutes waiting to pick your kids up or whatever. Before bed, you do 100 corrections or whatever it may be. So that would be really good. That's the Get Involved app. It has, I can't remember exactly what it looks like, but I know it has something similar to what the Family Search app looks like, a similar logo to the Family Search logo. So there's that. On the actual Family Search app, you can do a lot of different things. There's tasks. I love doing tasks. A lot of it is sometimes, because so many different people are putting new information into Family Search, sometimes you get duplicates of the same person because they'll find them on different records and make 2 different people. So you can go in and merge duplicates. You can add records. So they think, oh, you have, for example, I have a Johanna Altman on my family tree. I don't know why that name jumps out at me, but they'll say, oh, we think we found Johanna Altman on this census record or this birth record, and you check it to make sure all of the information is actually her, or at least to your best guess is actually her, and you can attach that record to her profile so that you can learn more about her, and you might even find new people, kids or siblings or parents or whatever, that aren't in Family Search yet, and you can make those people. You can also, they have some other random ones like improving place names, things like that. Of course, you can go in and find new people and add new people to your tree. You can take people to the temple. All of that's family history work. But also, one of the things he has in here is, so he says, the Lord encourages us, members of his church, to preserve our own family history. We're doing that. To make the necessary arrangements for them to receive the ordinances of the gospel in the temple. And then the other one is to learn from our ancestors. And that one, I think, can be thought of in a lot of different ways. Talking to your grandparents or your great-grandparents, hearing stories from your parents about their parents or their grandparents, recording those stories, learning from those stories, even just going through Family Search and like learning about the ancestors that are there. Even if there's not a whole lot of information, you can at least be like, oh wow, they were born in Boston, but they died in California. I wonder how they got all the way across the country. Or wow, they immigrated from Sweden or Africa or whatever, right? You can learn about where you came from and the sacrifices that your ancestors made, and learn about their lives and the times in which they lived, to see what their life was like and all of the things that happened for you to be you and to exist in this world. And there are places in the world that they don't really have great access to internet or Family Search, and they have just the little like My Family History booklets that they fill out on paper. You could even just start there to just know your family's story and to learn more about who you're related to and where you come from. That's all family history. That's all, you know, bringing you closer to your family and to the people around you that live in this world. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. He goes on to kind of share his own testimony of family history and some of the things that President Nelson has taught us about family history and the work of salvation. So to recap those 2 questions, what family history work have you done in the past? And then what can you do to perform family history work in ways that work for you? Talk to your family history consultants, go on Family Search and see just what they have and what you're interested in. When I was first in COVID quarantine as a missionary, one of the things they told us to do was online service projects, and we had no idea what that meant. But the only thing we could come up with is family history. And so we had the apps on our phones, and then we had a member bring her laptop a couple times and we did indexing. There's just so many things that you can do, even if you're just reading through stories or, you know, doing little tasks. There's so many things you can do if you can't take people to the temple, if you're too far away from a temple, if you don't want to figure out technology, if technology really freaks you out, there are ways to do family history that are kind of ways that we don't talk about very often. So I'll list some of the things that I put in, like some of the apps that I talked about, some of the suggestions in the show notes. And then as for some further study, the Why Weekly article I talked about is called Celebrating a Temple in Hungary by Janka. I'm going to say her name so bad. Janka Toronyi. So it's Why Weekly in May of 2019. And I believe it's week 2. So when you go in through there, they have different weeks. And then he quotes, like I said, Boyd K. Packer from 2 different things. They're kind of the same thing with an updated version. So it's the Holy Temple that was put out in 1980, and then Preparing to Enter the Holy Temple, both by Boyd in 2002, and they're both by Boyd K. Packer. They're used a lot in temple prep classes. That was the pamphlet. I didn't have time for a temple prep class before I went to temple, so I was handed Preparing to Enter the Holy Temple by Boyd K. Packer as my temple prep. So you can find both those on the church website and on library. And then there's 2 talks by President Nelson, one from October of 1994, The Spirit of Elijah, and then one from October of 2021, just a couple years ago, The Temple and Your Spiritual Foundation. So if you're wanting to learn more about family history, temples, there's also, just look up temples. We have a whole website about temples through the church website. There's books and articles and histories up the wazoo about family history work and temples. So that's all I've got for y'all today, but thank you so much for listening and or watching this episode of General Conference Conversations. As usual, I said it would be short, and now it's almost 40 minutes, so just don't listen to me. I don't know what I'm talking about. As always, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram. I update there when episodes have dropped. You can also subscribe here on YouTube, also on any podcatcher of choice, and get notified when new episodes drop there as well. I would also love to hear your comments, reviews, emails, messages, whatever you... I love hearing comments, I love getting comments, and I love hearing ways that I might have helped or asked questions or told a story that helped in a way. I also love hearing your stories. If there's something you want to add to an episode, please let me know. All of that is linked in the show notes and the description below, and I will talk to y'all next time.